Greetings! Welcome to Terra Prime Live, our weekly show on all things sabering. Today we're going to be talking about anger. Anger is a emotion that comes into play a lot when we're talking about Star Wars and martial arts in general. Any type of combative situation, we're going to be dealing with that kind of emotion. So we're going to talk about a little bit about how it affects you, what it is. And what we can do about it, what you should do about it, all of that kind of thing. So uh, hopefully we'll have a good discussion. Joining me again on the program is our own Count Arcanus, Gary. Oh, well, he was here.
I'm still here. My camera's
Oh, there you go. Yes, he is now the floating symbol of doom. But anyway, yes. So hopefully we'll get some more from the count here. Uh, so anyway, okay. So anger. What are we going to be talking about exactly? Now there's a couple of different kinds. There's obviously being angry at something that happens right away, and that's going to be more of what we're going to be focusing on. When something happens and somebody does something that we don't like at work or in personal life or something like that, and it tests our temper. We become frustrated. We become ornery and all of that kind of thing. So that's the main type of anger that we're going to be talking about. That's that kind of emotion that overcomes you in that respect. There's also a kind of anger, what we kind of call anger, where we're still angry about something, even though we're not necessarily in the moment, and that can be considered like holding grudges and that kind of thing. So that would be kind of another kind, and we can talk a little bit about that. Hopefully, we'll get more people joining up in here. Yeah, so we'll kind of start with it in that respect. So the first thing what we're talking about with anger is a emotional reaction to a stimulus. So, and most of the time, this is biologically kind of connected to us in a kind of the fight or flight scenario. So it is our physiological response to stress that we think is threatening us or threatening our particular being or status in whatever it was. And from that point, we kind of just lose our temper that way. Hold on a second. We've got some. Okay, Gary will be with us here in a moment, so we'll just keep going. So yeah, so there's that. When it happens to us, our heart rate raises. We kind of get flush. Blood goes to our extremities. We start releasing endorphins, and we get kind of this jazzed up and revved up feeling. To the point where sometimes after a conflict, even an emotional conflict, a fight with your sister or your brother or just a friend or something like that, will leave you shaking. And that can be attributed to a bunch of physiological things that happen when we become angry. When something comes into us that we either perceive as a threat, and this is where we're going to get into that whole phrase of fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, anger leads to suffering, which is obviously a huge part of the Star Wars universe. But as we get more and more angry, those physiological effects become more and more pronounced, and the more pronounced they get, the more our own perceptions of reality become warped and changed. So when just the very fact of having an elevated heart rate can make one dizzy. can cause blurred vision or tunnel vision, can cause spots in the eyes. So just our very vision, just what we see with our very own eyes, can be affected by an excess of blood flow or too much blood pressure, that kind of thing. The different neurotransmitters that are sent out through that process kind of make us a little bit physically numb, because they distract us from that pain, or that sensation in the body a little bit, because it's kind of preparing you to be able to really push through something that maybe an injury, maybe something like that, because you might be saving your life. And that's where all of these are rooted. They're rooted in this very primal, very basic, very uncontrollable thing that is in all of us, this animalistic behavior. The problem is that as we have evolved, we no longer necessarily need that response so much. And nature is, the way it works, it's going to err on the side of caution. The more successful trait is going to be the one that's going to give the biggest benefit to survival. If you have two things, an overreaction, playing it safe, is probably going to yield more survival than an underreaction to that kind of danger. So what has happened is we have a hair trigger now. We get to modern times and we react to every little thing as if it is, in the same physiological way, a physical threat. If we look at some of our closest ancestors, chimps, and their sociology, right? The way they operate in groups. When somebody kind of gets out of the group, starts to shake things up, the other ones become angry and try to bring it back into the fold or push it out of the fold. Something to maintain the stability and everything like that. And that's all great for that level of survival, where you're an animal and you're living at the starvation level and all of this kind of stuff. But we have long since passed that need. Unfortunately, nature has not quite caught up in all of our traits, and one of those traits being our emotional states. Anger being probably one of the most common and most exploited of our emotional states. And we'll go into that right now. When you get angry, all these physiological things that happen to you have obviously a physiological impact on you. You start to see things differently, right? You start to hear qualities differently and all that kind of thing. But also it starts to affect you cognitively. Innocent phrases when you are fuming, when you are really, really angry, or if you're angry at a particular person, you associate this particular feeling with a particular person and you haven't quite explored through it yet. Innocent things that they say will come out, and you can interpret them as being terribly, terribly offensive or insulting. They had no intention of doing that or anything like that, but because of that relationship there, because that whole thing was tainted, one can see that. When we're dealing with other people and they're angry and they react that way to us, we have to remember that sometimes they're not necessarily reacting to us. They're reacting to an emotional state that they're in. We happen to come along at the wrong time, and they are now interpreting everything we say in that particular vein. So there's that very, very pretty firm fact that when you are angry, you are not thinking clearly. You don't have a whole lot of cognitive processes that are really right there and able to operate very good. You have escape and you have fight. And these are the two overriding things. Anything there that comes in will either be considered a threat or not a threat. Non-threats will be ignored. Threats will be focused on when you're in that state. And this is one of the reasons why in martial arts there's the adage of never attack in anger. Um, there's a lot of stuff where people will tell you, modern psychotherapy and all that kind of thing, that you never act in anger. If you are still angry, you step away from it. You somehow calm down, so that you are not basing your decision on anger. Now, sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you're so involved in that kind of thing, and that's when you kind of have to, you know, uh, uh, step back and maybe get a third party to come in and help out. So, okay. Welcome back, Gary. How you doing?
Not doing too bad, Master. Somebody decided to attack my computer, so I had a bit of issues, crashing and whatnot. Hopefully, all fixed.
Okay, very good, very good. Yes. So we're basically talking about the what the physiological state of anger does to one. And I was just talking about how it taints our perceptions of things, as well as, both physically and mentally, so that not only are we getting dizzy and we hear things kind of strange and all that kind of stuff, but if we're in an angry state, innocent things can be interpreted as insulting or as an attack. Because when we're in that state, our brain kind of reverts back to this kind of very, very polarized view, which is threat and non-threat. And just as you were coming in, I was saying that threats, when you're in that state, threats are ignored, or non-threats are ignored, and threats are focused on. So if we stay in that state of anger for too long, what can happen is that we get an overarching negative view of everything, which is not necessarily the true view. It just happens to be the state of mind that we're in. Our brain is separating things in these two boxes, and there's not a whole lot of argument in there. Do you have any comments or anything like that before we move on?
Not a great deal, really. I mean, other than to say, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's probably, I don't know whether it's necessarily widely known, but it's certainly, I think, widely felt that when, as you were saying, when you're angry, you feel different about things, you see things differently, you do view things as threats, and it's far easier when you're already angry to get insulted by things that are meant quite innocently. It does alter it, that sort of uncontrolled, just kind of losing your temper. It does completely, change your perception of everything, really.
Yes. Yep. And it's not, and this is funny when we talk about anger a lot. And one of the reasons we have it is also one of the reasons that we feel so possessive of it. You'll notice that people get angry when you seemingly, when we talk about anger in an objective stance. And one of the reasons is because one of the things about our anger is it's a kind of emotional response for us to exert our being out there when we feel that we're not. It's kind of a force of strength. It does serve a purpose in high stress situations. There is a time when it is appropriate to show anger. The acting on the anger is what we're really focusing on, because when we have that altered state of mind, lots of things happen. As we said, we tend to take things more negatively, which will then, of course, maybe cause us to say something that will then make them angry, which will then escalate this, and then all of a sudden you have a situation which may have started as a misunderstanding, and it just escalates to ridiculousness. Now that's an easy question, but here's the problem when we start talking about anger and why people tend to get angry when we take this away, is we want to feel like our anger is validated, and we also want to feel like our anger is justified. And when people say that, tell us to calm down, or tell us to let it go, or tell us this, even though they're coming from a very good place of, look, it's having a negative effect on you, and you can't really do anything about it, there's really no point in being angry about it, just take it easy on yourself. When you're in that state, you don't really hear it that way. You hear it as, you have no right to be angry, why are you angry, just shape up. Now, of course, nobody means it that way. We all get angry, and it's an emotional reaction, just like a reflex. What we're really talking about is not necessarily the feeling of the anger. You're going to feel angry at times. It's just going to happen, right? But there is a way that you can kind of control and not have that feeling control you. You can control that feeling um, that way. But one of those things is we want to feel like we have a reason. Anger serves a purpose. We feel justified in our anger because we get angry at injustices out there. When we see people being mistreated, we get angry. When we see when we get frustrated with things that we're trying to accomplish that we can't quite do because of whatever, we get angry. So there's many times that we kind of express this type of thing, and when we start talking about it as a negative thing, which it really is, because it doesn't really yield us anything in most of these cases. Yes, if we're angry at something sociologically, we have our cause, right? We all have our causes, right? And if somebody opposes that, we feel threatened from that, and we will get angry, and we will fight for that cause. Now, that's a positive outcropping of anger. However, that impetus, that the anger pushed you onto that path, right, is good. That's really where it should stop, right? Because that anger won't serve you when you're actually trying to get what you want done, right? So if I'm a protester, I can get angry to get out awareness and get out there and everything like that. But if I want anything to change, I got to go out there and I have to take a totally different approach. I can't just get up there and yell in people's faces because people shut down. I know that. All of us should know that. When people get angry and start yelling at us, we don't feel more inclined to listen to them, more welcoming of their opinion. We feel offended. We feel attacked, right? We get defensive. We may get angry. And then that whole cycle kind of goes in there. So there's this overarching kind of feeling that there is a power in anger, that you can get a power in anger. And I think that's often, claimed that, the Sith and all of that kind of thing talk about that. And we talk about that a lot when we're talking about the different realities of philosophy and stuff. And yes, you could totally see that that a group of people would consider anger like this weapon, because there are certain things that happen physiologically in situations which you would be in a Star Wars setting where that could help, right? In a battlefield where you're hopelessly outnumbered, in situations this, that, and the other, all over the place. So there is a point to that. We don't really live in those times. Here, at least most of the people watching this show don't have that actually happening to them too much. If you're in the military, of course, that's an exception. But most of us, I would say, live fairly pastoral lives in regards of that kind of thing. So our anger tends to be overblown over things that just don't really mean anything, because just how we're wired up, right? So one of those things that is attributed to anger is that it gives you power, it gives you strength. And there's a couple of ways that is totally not the case. First of all, physically. Physically, when you're angry, when you're in a heightened emotional state, yes, your muscles are supercharged. You've got a whole bunch of stuff like this, so you can output all that kind of stuff really, really well, so that you can fight and you can flee with good energy. What you sacrifice in that is motor control. Okay, so that's why when you train martial arts, you train so hard, so that when you get into those situations, your body knows automatically what to do, because you're not going to be able to think about it. You're going to be kind of moving over to this kind of automatic type of thing, because it just happens too fast, and all that. If I go into a conflict and I completely lose my temper, my strength and my agility and stuff like that is going to be compromised unless I specifically train it, as in martial arts, to overcome that particular thing. So I will fatigue quicker. I will not be able to produce as much force because my body mechanics are off, my movement are off. And this is in the fighting thing. Now, mentally, in that sense, we're no longer thinking clearly. We're thinking in threat, non-threat. And all the non-threat stuff is ignored. So we're only focusing on the threat. So when you're in that state, or if somebody's in that state and you're talking to them, you basically, your one thing to do is you just have to get them to calm down. Don't talk about the subject. Don't talk about anything like that. Try to remove them from the situation. Try to distract them. Kind of go out like that. Apologize. Do whatever it takes to bring them out. Because if you start to plead with them, if you start to try to use logic and reason with them in that state, they're not going to respond to it because they're no longer hearing that. Anything that is not a threat is going to be ignored. So anything that you say that would be a positive, no, you're a good friend of mine, you're this, that, and the other, this, that, and the other. They're not even hearing that. All they're hearing about is this little thing. And when we get into an argument, we tend to want to get our point across, and we'll try to wedge it in there, even as we're trying to kind of come off it a little bit. And that can be perceived, especially with people in that state, as not necessarily threatening, but confrontational. So yeah, thoughts, questions, or anything like that, Gary?
I have some thoughts on this because obviously knowing the show was coming up, I was thinking about this a lot. There is one instance in my own personal life that I don't know if you want to get into maybe later on, where I found anger actually very useful because it ended up being, in a sense, a kind of an emotional replacement for something else, at that particular time in my life, I needed that. So I don't know if that's something you maybe want me to sort of unpack a little bit and get into. But the other thing that occurred to me was something. It struck me actually. I had a similar thought to what you did about anger as a motivation to then do things. Because, I mean, from a Star Wars context, we're all familiar with anger leads to hate, hate leads to, what is it?
Fear leads to anger,
anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. Well, it occurred to, I actually started that premise again, but from anger. And it struck me that anger can lead you to determination, and then once you're determined, you persevere, and then once you persevere, you can achieve and succeed whatever it is that you want to achieve. But as you were saying, the anger is only useful to actually get that impetus going. Of right, I'm definitely going to do that. I'm so mad about it. I'm going to do something about it. But it obviously, once you get to that stage of starting that process, then its usefulness diminishes.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's useful at any state. I would say that the anger that you're expressing, its purpose, the physiological expression of it, is that once we get angry, once we react that way, we immediately have to try to, kind of bring it in, because then it becomes counterproductive, right? Mm-hmm. Not only counterproductive, but absolutely destructive. And I think and I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but there's lots of places like that where people say that, and whenever this topic will come up, there will be at least 2 or 3 people who will say this. Well, I've got situations where anger was a benefit to me. And here's the thing. Certain aspects may have been, right? But more than likely, the anger was simply an accompaniment to an event that just happened. At that point, when we have that type of anger, and like you said, it replaced something else, when we replace something else with anger, that's, I don't know, it becomes problematic because we're replacing one emotion for another, or one thing for the other. If it's misplaced anger, that can be unbelievably destructive. Now, what happens a lot of times is we have misplaced anger and nothing happens. right? We don't get any negative consequence from it because the situation never occurred that would have given us that negative consequence. And then what can happen is we get down the road and say, well, okay, well, that seemed to work for me, right? That got me through. Because like I said, when you are angry, especially when you're really enraged, you feel stronger, right? You feel more aware. You feel more sensitive and all of that kind of thing. You're objectively none of those things. Objectively and scientifically and all medically and everything like that, it's precisely the opposite. You're kind of given this false sense of determination and everything like that. So that while you may say that anger can lead to determination, more than likely that anger is an outcropping of a determination that was there and was frustrated. If you get my meaning.
I do. I mean, the particular. I'm happy to talk about it. If you want, if you want to do. The particular instance was in relation to my father, and obviously losing my father last year. At that point, I mean, yes, yes, you're right. I was frustrated. I was frustrated at the way, the way things had turned out, at the, his sort of handling of the whole situation, which led to, led to his death. And at that point, it would have been very, very easy for me to just disappear in a hole of grief, to just disappear into hopelessness and despair. But I didn't. And what I did is I became extremely angry.
And when did you decide to become angry?
To be honest, I think it was actually, I think it was actually a conscious decision. It was the day of his funeral. I was sat there and I just thought, no, I'm angry about this. I am furious at this. I'm furious that things have got to where they're at, and I'm not going to just, curl up in a ball and weep. I refuse to do that. And I remember myself sat there, while the sermon was going on, just thinking to myself, no, I'm not doing that.
And see, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just remember sitting there thinking, no, I'm not doing that. I'm actually too angry at him.
Yeah.
That anger lasted for a very, very long time, and it did actually, because the thing is, once at that point, there was an awful lot of things within the family that then needed sorting out, which if I had disappeared into a hole of being upset and in grief and all the rest of it, I don't think I would have been in a position to sort out, because I'd have just been through all over the place.
Well, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that it because I was, in a way, it held back other emotions. And it put me in a position where it's like, right, no, okay, I've got to get on with this stuff now. I've got to sort this out, and I did. And so in that respect, I do think it was a conscious decision to let that feeling dominate, and it did help me. I mean, I'm not saying that necessarily physiologically what I did was right, or that the scientific evidence backs it up. I just know that from a feeling point of view, that worked for me at that particular time.
Well, here's where I would differ with you. From everything that you said, nothing screams to me conscious decision. What it screams to me is that you became angry and then realized it. Said, I'm not sad, I'm angry. Fuck you. And excuse my language, but that's what we feel. And that's an unbelievably common and normal experience, especially in grief and especially with death. If we take it in a large context, which is not personal to each one of us, look at the death of like a famous person like Robin Williams, okay, and especially a suicide, okay. You saw lots of these articles coming out of people saying suicide is selfish. How dare he do that? He's got a family. Blah 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 blah. And that's that anger coming through, because you're getting to the point where you're basically, your mind says, I cannot deal with this grief anymore. And then it switches. I'm going to be pissed at it. I'm going to be pissed at it. As you go through that then phase, and people say it's like the phases of grief and all that, and that's not necessarily true. But all of these things are very common grieving situations that we don't really have a whole lot of control over. Where I would say what I'm waiting for is an example of somebody who said, I was depressed and everything like that, and I literally tried to go out and make myself feel angrier, and the angrier I got, the better I felt. Right? To where they had to force themselves to do it. Most people say, oh no, I'm going to go angry. But when we're talking about loss, like what you're talking about, none of those emotions that we feel during loss are appropriate, right? Our grief, our all of that kind of stuff. None of this stuff happens. It just happens in our in our being. We lose somebody who we love and who means something to us, and we grieve. That's a huge emotional tear that will rip somebody apart, right? And that's unbelievably complicated feelings that your brain has to figure out, and it's going to try to put them into boxes. At first, you're sad, you're all that kind of stuff. Next, you may be angry. You may not be angry at the person. You may be angry at something that happened. Again, I bring up the when suicides happen. You get a whole segment of people who become very, very angry at the person who committed suicide because they feel that was their choice. And again, I say it is no more of a choice than you had a choice of becoming angry at it or thinking that it was, right? Because it's another emotional response to it. What happens with suicide is that that despair or whatever kind of overcomes and takes over, just very much like the anger thing, and taints everything, so that even good news that comes in is interpreted as bad news, and that's when you really, really have a problem. So at that point, even feeling the anger, right? Even though it's a natural kind of process that we'll get through, because we are angry. Let's just face it. When somebody leaves us like that, we're terribly angry. I needed you. How could you not think of me? How could you just leave me here, right? And I think that's a very common thing. I mean, obviously, it's so common that it's become a trope. With the stages of grieving. I think they did one on The Simpsons where he goes through that as he says them. You have grief. Oh, then you have anger. No, I'm not sick. Then you have bargaining. Oh, but maybe if I do this and I do this, and there's all these different things that we all go through. These little dances that we go through, and that we come out on the other side. Where I think that's a little bit different than what this type of thing. Although it can, obviously, if you're in that stage of grief, or if you're angry because you've lost somebody, that's going to taint everything that you experience. That's a terrible, terrible event in somebody's life. And for when we are interacting with people out there, we have to always remember that maybe they've gone through something like that, and that they're not necessarily reacting to us, and they're not necessarily reacting to anything we say. They're just, they're feeling something there. And I think we can move right into what you were saying, what you brought up there, which is that whole Yoda phrase: the fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And although we can argue in canon, Sith, all Latin, or Darksiders, and all that kind of thing, the very fact of the matter is, whether you're a Darksider or a Lightsider, you're going to have to accept that this fact is true. Now, what you do with this fact is, of course, up to you. But we'll talk about this. Fear leads to anger. We've been talking about this, that anger is a physiological and emotional response to threat or to something like that, and it's connected to our fight or flight response. And that physiologically and sociologically and linguistically and everything like that can be very connected to what we consider to be the experience of fear. And the experience of fear and the experience of anger are very, 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 very similar. In fact, most negative emotions have almost the same expression, except for the emotional presence or present, the presentation of it, whether they be sad or be irate or anything like that. There are different markers for that type of thing, but the physiological symptoms often in grief, heart rate, shaking, all of this kind of stuff, the blurred vision, right? So what could happen is that when we get into these heightened emotional states, sometimes we don't know what emotion we're expressing, right? It's just kind of coming out. Fear will put us in that state probably quicker than anything else in the world, and it just goes to show you, this will show you there are a certain number of people that if you jump out and you startle them, become extremely angry with you. How dare you do that? Ah, you bastard! Blah! And you go boo, and you scare them. They get really, really mad, right? Most people will start to get a little, and then they'll realize what's going on, and maybe they'll get the joke, and hopefully they'll laugh along with you and everything like that. But there's a lot of people that all of a sudden, boom, that triggers it, blah! And then now you either got to let them calm down out of that kind of thing, just back off of it, let them forget about it, or whatever. But when we're in that state, fear will automatically start to do that whole thing, which starts to translate into this. Now, what happens a lot of time, and this is where we get that sense of fear or of anger giving us power, is because with fear, often, and as you were saying, anger is used to replace that. Fear makes us feel weak. Anger makes us feel strong. So let's just replace fear to anger. Now we're angry, right? We're angry because we're afraid, but we're not going to let anybody know that, right? Because that's weakness. So anger is our show of strength. Okay, and that's why we always say, oh, well, I've always felt that anger is giving me this and giving me this and giving me this. Well, that's what you're supposed to think. That's what it's meant to make you think, is to make you feel strong, to make you feel confident and stuff like that, but for a very short period of time, right? Seconds, minutes, whatever, however that experience lasts. So when we become fearful of things, we become very angry, and that's easily seen in the political spectrum out there, right? You have people choosing sides, liberal, conservative, this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And what it really comes down to is everybody's trying to scare everybody else. They're out for you, and they're out for you. And you guys need to be afraid. And once they're afraid, then you got to get angry. You got to get angry, and now I got to mobilize you over there. And that brings us to our little thing here. Yes, it will lead to hate. We'll leave the hate and suffering thing over to the side. But let's take this state of anger and what happens with it. So we go from fear and we go to anger. Now we're angry. And here's the thing that nobody really thinks about, but is absolutely true, and people who are into fighting arts and everything like that know that. An angry person is the easiest person to manipulate. If you get somebody really irate and you know how to push their buttons, you can pretty much make them do anything you want them to do, even if it goes against their own self-interest, right? And that was played out, of course, in Star Wars with Vader and with Luke, and why is the Emperor telling him, give in to your anger, give in to? Is it really that he wants that anger is so powerful, or does he want Luke to let down his defenses, become completely, give himself completely over to just complete this, that, and the other, end up killing his father, and then be so racked with guilt that the Emperor then can come in and console him and be all of that and give him everything he wants, right? Because that's one of the things that people will try to do. They get you angry. No, what are you talking about? He really, really did something to you. You should be angry about that. Once people start saying that to you, when people start telling you to be angry at other people, be very, very wary. Because often that person wants you to be angry at them just because they're angry at them and they want more people on their team. And that happens a lot, way more than one would really like to admit. Um, and again, you can see it everywhere out there. Like you, Gary, in England, you just had the vote for Scottish independence and everything like that. And I'm sure fear and talk of the future and dire consequences on both sides did play some sort of part in the national dialogue. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely it did. I mean, both sides basically, in a sense, bringing up everything that could go wrong, and then one side kind of identifies it and say, "Oh, you're just trying to scare us," you're scaremongering. So yeah, that was a very, that whole sort of fear, and there was a lot of anger. I mean, you could see it on it's funny watching the TV reports. They tried not to kind of show it. They tried to say, "Oh yes, it's a very sort of calm and well-meaning and well-conducted debate." But you could see there were people who were shouting obscenities into the camera and throwing eggs at each other, and it was there. It's just it wasn't widely reported.
Yeah, right. And that happens with all of this kind of stuff. And um, what will happen is the times that it gets reported are usually when when the people who are getting angry are against the status quo, right? So if you have protesters who are getting violent because they're against um, who are against gay marriage, like the Westboro Baptist Church, not getting a lot of sympathy from people, right? On the other hand, if you get people who are being angry and doing somewhat the same tactics, but doing it with maybe animal rights or human rights or something like that, doing it at the UN or something like that, you're going to get a lot less people who are going to step in and go, whoa, 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 what are you being? But both of those types of things, you can see this. PETA uses very many of the same tactics that the anti-abortion lobbies use. Gruesome pictures, out of context film, gore, stuff like this. Again, trying to inspire that fear and then inspire that anger. And once they get you angry, then you can go into the mob. And once they got this mob going, then they have some sort of power. Now, I'm not saying that there's like evil people at the head of all of these organizations thinking this way. This is just the way humans kind of operate. It's all subconscious. None of it's. I'm not spouting conspiracy theories here. I'm just saying this is just kind of the way we operate. And if you think about your own behavior, you tend to do this on a lower scale. If you're trying to convince somebody of something that you feel very, very, very strongly about, you will be much more likely to bring in hyperbolic arguments that maybe not totally even, maybe a little bit exaggerated and everything like that. And you're prepared to walk off of them, so you're okay with that. But you might put them out there just to see if it will stick. We've all done it, I think, and all of that. But that's the thing. When you get somebody afraid of things, you can get them angry. And once you get them angry, all you have to do is say, "There's the source of what you are angry about. Go get them," right? And boom, they will go. And most of the time, they won't even ask. And it's until after the fact. It's not until after the fact that they actually realize something bad has happened. Crimes of passion are totally like this. People who kill loved ones simply because they fly off the handle. They lose their temper. Oh, should we forgive them or this, that, and the other? No, we're not talking about forgiveness. We're not talking about, anything like that. But we're kind of talking about a reinterpretation. A crime of passion, the person is not in control at that time. Why did they fly out of control? Well, that's a question that you have to ask by looking at the particular situation. But we don't have a lot of control over this kind of stuff. Once we realize this dynamic between fear, anger, all of that kind of thing, it becomes possible for us to control our behavior and help navigate these kind of pitfalls, right? We are all going to get angry. that's just a fact of life. I'm not saying that nobody can get angry and that your anger isn't justified. I'm angry about certain things, totally justifiable. You are angry about things totally justifiably. We've all got justifiable anger out there. What we don't want to do is we do not want to ruin our cause or poison the well simply by blindly lashing out in anger. Um, in fighting, when people say, "Oh yes, well I tend to get angry and then I can overpower them," well, that only works if the only thing that your opponent is using to overcome you is strength and speed, physical stuff. But I can tell you right now, as somebody who's been very experienced in this kind of stuff, as soon as the other guy gets angry, it's easy at that point. They lose their aim, their distancing goes off. Sometimes you don't even have to parry their strikes. You just sit back and let them whoosh, whoosh in the air, let it go past, and then throw your strike in there. Because it gives people a sense of strength, a sense of this. I can now bring it up, like you said, that sense of determination. But it's a chicken and the egg thing. And if you really look at it, the feeling of determination is much more solid and much more enduring than the anger. The anger goes up and goes down. The determination is probably there, right? And usually it's that determination which may make somebody angry because we're determined. Because we're determined, and all of a sudden we've been frustrated, or somebody's trying to stop us. We're now in competition with somebody, right? All of these things can happen. All of these things create anger, and when we're angry, we say things we don't mean. We say things we shouldn't have. We do things we shouldn't do. And we need to kind of back off of this. So that would be there. Thoughts on that there, Gary? Or
Yeah, two thoughts really. One is really a question. Do you think there's a difference between anger that you allow in yourself, or that you bring up in yourself, where you're angry at something for your own personal reasons, and anger inspired in you by other people in order to manipulate you? That's kind of the first thing. So in a sense, things that you feel internally for your own reasons, and something that's being projected onto you by others for the, as you said earlier, the purpose of manipulation.
right. Well, I would say that the anger that most people feel, like existentially, just in their daily lives, I'm angry about the banks being able to get out of paying taxes or what have you, something like that. We use terms like angry. We're not really angry about it. We're concerned about it. We may be angry and fearful of what the implications may be. We may want something to be done about it. We may have a big, strong drive and determination to do something about it. On the other hand, we may fear it, and we may be angry at it because we're totally afraid of it. We may be angry at the opposition because we're totally afraid of what they're opposing. That happens a lot of times too. So I would say that it would have to be anger, or it would have to come from the outside to really be considered anger in my mind, because anger would be a reaction to that. So whereas your sense of justice will tend to make you angry if confronted with situations where justice is being abridged or being circumvented, in that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess what I'm kind of getting at is an example from where you're personally angry at a particular person for a particular reason, like as I say, myself and my father, or whatever that is. You're angry with a person, as opposed to somebody else over on the sideline saying to you, "Hey, they're doing X, Y, and Z. You should be angry at them." And that kind of sort of mob incitement, which brings up anger in people, that is entirely external and manufactured by others. That's the distinction I'm making.
Yeah, I don't think there is a distinction there. I think that what it is basically basically if you're angry at at the death of your father. You're in that stage of your process, right? You were vulnerable to people capitalizing on that. They don't necessarily have to direct you towards somebody, but all they have to do is make you feel a little bit threatened, right? You once they make you feel a little bit threatened, that anger, which is already going right here, just simply switches targets and goes over there, right? So I can make you angry about something completely irrelevant. Once you're angry, then I can make you do stuff, right? And that's the whole thing. It really works the best if you're getting people angry about something that's irrelevant, right? Because now they're getting angry about something. They're so focused on what they're being angry about. You can do whatever you want, or the miscreants can do whatever they want over here without being bothered. Everybody's so worried about arguing about this over here, which is completely inconsequential, and then other people are just kind of circumventing the whole argument and doing stuff that actually matters over there. So I don't think there really is a difference between the two angers, right? Many of the people that get angry politically are angry in their personal life, right? They have things to be angry about. Either that, or they have to be made to fear something very, very strongly, and that's I think that would be the trick. Is that a little bit closer to what you're asking there?
Yeah, it is. It kind of clears that up a little bit. The other thing that occurred to me was the idea of crystallizing anger into something else. For example, I mean, as you were saying, anger is this kind of this sort of raw, overpowering emotion that makes you do silly things, makes you careless, and you don't react as quickly as you should. You don't see as clearly as you should. Compared to, say, something like hatred, which can be cold and calm and calculated, and is a totally different thing. I mean, you can be completely and totally clinical in hatred, but you can't be in anger. And I'm wondering if it's useful, in a sense, to try to turn the anger into something less reactionary, that in order to be able to use that.
I disagree that hatred you can be calculating and all of that. I think we misattribute calculating and stuff to hatred. I think the people that do cruel things and are very, very calculating about it and can do all of that kind of stuff have a complete lack of emotion. They don't feel hatred. They don't feel anything, and that's what enables them to do that. But hatred, I think, is an outcropping of anger. If you become angry at something and you're angry at it for so long, you hate it, right? It makes you feel bad. You don't want to be around it, and you'll become hostile to it whenever it rears its head, right? You can have a brooding, teeming type of hatred, and somebody can plot against somebody for a very, very long time. Most of the time, the plots that are hatched purely out of hatred are simple in their design and brutal in their execution, whereas the other types of crimes are generally very, very calculated and stuff like that. I mean, I guess you could call the Nazis calculating and everything like that, but that's a really good example of what I'm talking about. They were only able to fuel their whole thing on a hatred thing for a very short period of time. And then it all fell apart, because that just can't, I don't know, you just can't do it. But as far as what you're going to do with it, with your anger, that's a good thing. Where do we take it? Obviously, if you're in a situation like you're being attacked or something like this, and we talked about this in Form 7 and Juyo and everything like that, is one of the things you can take all of these common physiological experiences, which you are now interpreting as anger and fear and all of that kind of thing, and reinterpret them as excitement and thrill and enjoyment, which, similar things happen. So if you really need to, in a particular setting, you can do that. You can kind of remove yourself from that so that you can do that. But as far as what to do, with anger, in general is you distract yourself. Um, whatever it is you're being angry about, you think about something else. Um, you completely go on, and if somebody's getting angry at you, completely change the subject, right? Oh, geez, God, have you seen my phone? Let's look for my phone. Here you go. Oh, okay. And you'll notice people, boom, they'll break right out of it, right? A lot of times. And that's one of those things that happens since you get into this hyper focused, kind of brain pattern. And as soon as you, boom, knock it off the track, it sticks there, and then there's nothing to be angry about, and you're good. Um, watching, I think they did some studies on this where they said watching something funny is generally the best thing to do to manage your anger. To go the opposite, to make yourself laugh, do something funny, watching a funny movie, that's read jokes, whatever makes you laugh, seems to be the best way to go. Before anger management, there was the catharsis thing. You got to let it out. Rawr! And what they found there is that the expression of anger, the physical expression, if I yell and scream and that actually feeds into the anger cycle. Whereas my body is now going, oh, okay, we are getting ready to do this. So, we're going to go for it. And so we found out that letting it out is not always the greatest thing to do, especially if you're doing it in a very kind of knee-jerk fashion. But they found, and I've tried this, and I can guarantee you that it works. If you can distract yourself, even for just a little bit, when you come back to it, yeah, sure, you still got the kind of fume and all that kind of stuff, but it does seem a little bit less. I grew up with this phrase, and maybe a lot of people you have: sleep on it. Don't make any decisions when you're angry. You sleep on it, right? So if you're angry about something, you go to bed, you wake up the next morning, and then you think about it. And that's a very, very sound practice, because in sleep you dream. And when you dream, you tend to work out complicated emotional stuff that you can't do during the day, during your waking hours, because it's too traumatic or too emotionally intense, right? Often what will happen is that your emotional state regulates throughout the night. You wake up and you look at it with a clearer head. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to start getting angry about a situation that persists, right? But what it does is it brings you back down into a place where you can deal with it, right? And you can have anger and you can put it over to the side. Right, and you say, I have to put this over to the side because I have to get this done. I have to fix it, right? But there's a whole host of things that we end up doing that we end up becoming invested, and we want to own our anger, and we want to keep our anger. It makes us strong. It makes us feel secure, and it makes us feel powerful. Unfortunately, it does exactly the opposite, as we've been saying there. So. So there. Okay, so finishing up, do you have anything to bring us in here? Or?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things occur to me. I mean, there are some things, and I'm sure we've all had these in our lives. There are some things that it doesn't matter how much you distract yourself from it. Every time you revisit it, the feelings of anger, the feelings of resentment are still there. So, I mean, that's a difficult thing to deal with, because you can, in a sense, the only way you can deal with that is to never think about it. Because when you do, you're back in that place of feeling angry again. The other thing is,
I was going to say, if that's the case, if you keep coming back to it and you still have that same reaction to it, my experience is that there's something else you're reacting to that you're not aware of.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And because usually if it's just that particular situation, once the situation kind of rectifies itself or whatever, you kind of go back to normal. If, when you keep coming to it, you keep getting that same emotional reaction, my suspicion is that there is something happening in here that is being reacted to that nobody's aware of. That would be my thing for that. So I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the other sort of final thought I had was, The other thing that I'm sure we're all familiar with as a phrase is the idea of bottling it up.
Hmm.
And if letting it out doesn't help because essentially it's a never-ending pool. You know, it doesn't matter how much you pour it out, it's still there. Um, but you know, equally so, you don't want to bottle it up, surely, because at some point, if you do that, if you kind of go, no, I can't be angry, no, I can't do it. At some point, it'll find an expression. It'll find, you know, the lid will come off. You know, I
Well,
mean, how do you deal with that?
yeah. Well, see, there. What you want to release is you want to release physical energy, right? The thing that makes anger continue is you express the anger and you wallow in it. I'm angry. I'm going to yell and be angry and use swear words and do all this kind of stuff, right? Um, the reason you do that is to expend energy, pent-up energy, and that's why we get that feeling of release. If you just release that energy, meaning you go run, you work out, you do something really physically hard, you have the exact same feeling of relief, and you don't exacerbate your anger. So you take care of the physical part of it, and then the emotional part kind of follows with it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be there. Okay. Well, we are at the end of another hour here, so thank you all for joining us if you're watching at home or watching after the fact. Thank you, Gary, Count Arcanis, for joining us this evening. We will be back next week. I believe we have Eroc's Sound Font show coming up, so tune in for that. And also coming up, we have the Seven Forms Symposium, the 3rd annual, where we will be talking about um, the actual thing, what we like about them, why we're using them, why we're doing this and not doing other stuff, and or why we're doing this stuff with other stuff. Anyway, so stay tuned for all of that. From all of us here at Terra Prime, have a great weekend and happy sabering.